And here's your prescription.
I know just the pharmacy to get this filled.
Who are you?
A pharmacy benefit manager. A middleman your insurer uses to decide which medicines you can get, what you pay, and sometimes even which pharmacy you should go to.
Why can't I go to a pharmacy in my neighborhood?
Because I make more money when you go to a pharmacy I own.
No one should stand between you and your medicine. Visit phrma.org/middleman to learn more. Paid for by Pharma.
We're coming, and we ain't backing down.
We don't need a bunch of cats in here looking in the mirror.
Everybody just do your job! You understand that?
Hey, will you shut up?
I'm bitterly disappointed with the officiating today.
Guys being dudes.
And they run through our like through a tin horn, man.
Thank you, Lee. Words to live by. Alex, we kick off the episode with podcast business?
A quick bit of podcast business, showing our thriving clout in the marketplace.
We're buying boats, baby.
We have a new partner on board right now. That is Extra Points, the college sports industry newsletter run by our longtime colleague and current friend, Matt Brown. Extra Points covers the off-field forces that shape college athletics. That runs from the Power 5 to the NAIA. And when Matt says he covers the whole sport, he really, really means it. He published a great interview just last week with an NAIA athletic director, actually at Point Park University in my hometown of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, about what it entails to actually run an athletic department at that level. It's so important to keep in mind, given how many schools there are that fall into these non-P5, non-FBS, non-D1 buckets. And Matt,
there are 1,300 NCAA schools. We didn't even talk about NAIA.
And Matt covers them all with exceptional capability and care. The newsletter covers topics like NIL legislation, FCS realignment, why certain cities produce more recruits than others, looking at U Chicago, how athletic department budgets actually work, and a lot more. Publishes 4 days a week, also has a weekly podcast, Going for Two, that Matt co-hosts with Brian Fisher. You should check it out for a great dive into the entire industry that underpins college sports. extrapointsmb.com/SZD. That's extrapointsmb.com/SZD gets you 20% off. Speaking of the industry that runs college sports and that flows underneath everything that we talk about on this show, we from time to time like to bring in a reporter who is extremely plugged in to that industry. It's been a while. First time, long time. Stephen Godfrey, welcome to the program.
It's plugged in and it flows like a sewer, you might say.
Like a sewer.
You might say I'm familiar with the sewage.
Podcasting is a visual medium.
Well, the big news in the industry, capital T, capital I, this week may just be that
Kansas hired an athletic director.
Richard, please.
This Kansas tyranny that you've been on, we need to have a Kansas intervention with him.
We do, and we need to stop this. But the big news in certainly athletic administrative circles this week is that a true titan of the industry, one of the more influential figures in college sports for the last 3 decades, is leaving college sports. That's Barry Alvarez, 32 years at Wisconsin, parts of, I think, 18 as head coach, though I lose track of when he just declares himself coach, and if we count those as full years, all of the rest of that time as the athletic director at Wisconsin. Probably did more to single-handedly change the fortunes of one program than any single coach or administrator in his time at Wisconsin. Is that a fair place to start?
Well, I mean,
he's next to
Bill Snyder ain't dead.
He's next to Bill. He's next to Bill Snyder.
Wisconsin was pretty
was
bad.
not Bill Snyder.
Wisconsin
was not.
I would also direct you young men to Virginia Tech. Take a gander at Virginia Tech pre Frank Beamer.
Yeah, look, he's been a big deal at Wisconsin and in the Big Ten. He was pretty involved in the creation and administration in the early days of the college football playoff. Also did an Entourage cameo in a very bad season of Entourage alongside Mike Ditka.
When is he in Entourage?
I did not know that.
He did.
I did not know that, and I was a big Entourage fan.
Well, we shouldn't admit this on this podcast. We should, but
personal growth is the name of the game.
Right, we've moved past this, but it's kind of big news because there just aren't a whole lot of people like Barry Alvarez still left in the waters who are sort of in this coach as an athletic director archetype. Barry was one of the last stalwarts on that front.
Barry is not dead.
He's not dead.
Yeah. Not dead.
Not dead.
Barry Barry was someone who, by design, I thought was someone that the sport should not emulate. That was a vestige of the old ways. And what I've come to learn in my time in the industry is you have to beat him, and no one ever did. And what I mean by that is, like, you would hear stuff when I was coming up as a reporter, like, well, it's really Barry Alvarez's program. It doesn't really matter who the head coach is. And we also saw Brett Bielema throw a pretty substantial amount of shade on his way out. We also heard this when Gary Anderson left Wisconsin for Oregon State, which seemed, I guess, then and now like a really strange move. But here's the thing, guys. Barry Alvarez installed a winning system of football at Wisconsin, so much so that they are like one of the few Power 5 pencil-it-in teams. Now, some in the industry, like our old pal Bud Elliott, will gleefully remind you that they are never going to sort of get through that like elite membrane grouping, right? They're always going to be your Citrus Bowl team. But damn if that's not a nice life, you guys.
Buddy, Orlando versus with Madison in January. I'm sure Madison is fun, but Orlando versus Madison in January those are two different propositions.
Also, if you're Paul Christ and everyone's like, well, that's really Barry's program, like, okay, but like you're also the coach of like a really, really good college football team in the Big Ten. The thing about Barry is, like, yeah, he was an athletic director. He was highly involved in the Big Ten. He's highly involved in the sport, period, like Alex was talking about. His influence carries. But, like, he's also a good ball coach. Like, I don't have anything negative to say about the man. This is not a Philip Fulmer situation, which is what Fulmer tried to kind of, like, push that narrative quietly when he retook control at Tennessee. That's a smack in the face of Barry Alvarez.
I think Barry whiffed twice on a Barry bot, and Barry finally got a Barry bot with Paul Christ. Now, again, it's going swimmingly from what it looks like on the face. They are, like you said, a competent program on the winnable side of the Big Ten. You sneak in there, and maybe in one game you can pip the team that comes out of the East. And mess around and make a playoff or something like that. There is a path. But Barry is really interesting. The question, Godfrey, that I think I want to ask you, better coach or athletic director? Because I don't think I have a good judge on. He retired in 2005 from being a head coach, which I didn't even realize.
Their athletic department is pretty strong.
I would say coach only because I don't know if you can separate the two, because anyone who goes in there at Wisconsin and tries to like dick with that system, it just doesn't work. I mean, and I don't know. I guess coach, but we've never really seen this before. We saw it in the 1940s. Richard and I were talking before the show started about how, like, ex-coach is not a good way to become an athletic director anymore. It's basically on its way out as a trend. We have just a handful of those guys left, but Barry was more than an ex-coach. I think that is not dead. I think that is, again, like what you should focus on if you don't know anything about Wisconsin, you don't know anything about Alvarez, was like he was a very mindful administrator, a very mindful executive, really, in helping shape what the Big Ten is today. So, and then guys, go back and look at some of those interim bowl games he coached. They played well. They played really well. Like he has such a knowledge of the structure because he's the author of it. I don't know, he's a very unique individual in college football. We will not see something like this probably again ever, at least in our time in the sport.
So there are a few reasons that jump to me that kind of strike at why this breed of athletic director is on the way out. And it makes some sense to go back, like you mentioned, the 1940s. Bear Bryant, when he left Kentucky, which would have been in the early 50s, for Texas A&M, became the athletic director at Texas A&M and walked into a pitfall that in those days you really didn't want you still don't want your high-priced star football coach to be in, which is you get yourself involved in bag manning and things of that nature, like to help your basketball team or to put out some other recruiting fire somewhere else in your athletic department. Bear did this, or allegedly did this, let's not disgrace the man's name, at A&M in the recruitment of a basketball player who wound up going to NC State, and it blew back pretty hard on Texas A&M football and cost them I believe, a pretty significant bowl appearance. I think it was a Cotton Bowl one year. And I think that there was probably some desire on the part of schools not to have football coaches mixed up in possible areas where malfeasance could come about if you're not even getting the benefit of a better football team when those things are done. And also, and maybe importantly, it strikes me that it probably doesn't look great at this moment, given the shape that certain college athletic scandals have taken in recent years, to have like the Huff and Puff football guy in charge of the entire athletic department.
Yeah, 'cause it's probably his fucking program that's in trouble.
Are there other reasons?
No.
Are those an accurate reflection of reasons why schools might not want this kind of AD? Or do you see something else as an undercurrent that will ensure there are very few Barry Alvarez's in the future?
I think it's you're shaping up a path that the industry took. And I think the reason why you can't just be a ball coach who moves into a corner office anymore is because the responsibilities of the athletic director have changed dramatically, because they are now overseeing $100 million corporations, essentially, that operate in a very specific manner. This is best left to those who engineer that kind of structure. So that's why fundraisers have been very popular. People with banking experience, people with marketing experience. I mean, I would say you'd be hard pressed not to find someone who doesn't have a fundraising, finance, or marketing PR background at most major schools and most positions of power. There's also a weird thing now where, like, you have families of athletic directors, which is such a strange thing to me to imply that genetics are involved in this strange job at all. But you have the Burns.
Well, they are called the White family.
I mean, you have the Whites, you have the Burns, you have, I mean, there are others that I can't think of off the top of my head. And so that always kind of cracked me up as well, because I don't understand how, like, family traits translate to being an athletic director. I'll leave it at that without getting really mean. But, the biggest thing is the money. It's always, I mean, the money's always the answer on the show. But these coaches, Alex, you were talking earlier about, like, mismanaging a situation with a basketball recruit for Bear Bryant. It's that, but it's also the fact that ADs are sitting in on more meetings and doing more branding and strategy work and finance and you know, donor wine and dine. These are things that, like, the AD didn't, like. I wish you could see, like, the AD itinerary. And I'm not talking about, like, in the 1970s. Like, even, like, 1995. I want, like, I wish, I don't know if someone out there could, like, help me here. But the average itinerary of an SEC AD in 1995, like 7 days in October, versus now. The job changed. And that's why, like, graduating a Muschamp type human being into a corner office to go glad hand dudes at a country club is no longer a smart option, because that guy also has to, like, navigate Title IX and deal with a milieu of women's sports and just in general not be a meathead with a necktie on.
One instructive example of this is, like, look at Clemson. Clemson's booster organization has a good name, IPTE. You know what that stands for?
I pay 10 a year.
So that was founded in, like, the 1930s. It's kind of simple when your fundraising responsibilities as an AD in a past era are go and get a bunch of people to pay $10 a year. Obviously, $10 went a lot further now. Now, Clemson's athletic director, Dan Radakovich, I am guessing, though I do not know him, has quite a bit more on his plate in the development space than whoever was running the show back then did. It's probably a lot harder.
And they also renovated IPTE when they got there. And Clemson's, it's funny you use Clemson as an example, because I think if you're looking at what kind of effect an athletic director can have on a program, Dan Radakovich and the job he's done at Clemson. I mean, I know Dabo coaches the games, but the establishment of Clemson as one of the 2 or 3 best brands in college football is as much Radakovich is doing as it is Dabo Swinney's.
Yeah, you know, what kind of athletic department do you want to have? Like Florida, who just won their 250th SEC championship victory in all sports, right? Florida, for what people think about Florida or know about Florida, Florida is deeply passionate about all of its sports and supporting all of its sports with money. Other programs, both around the state and around the conference, are let's say, less passionate about supporting all of the other sports the way that they deserve, merit, or what have you to be supported. Let's just, for kicks and giggles, throw a dart and say Alabama. Alabama's athletic department depth is not very deep. Clemson's really isn't either. Like, they fund football and they'll fund men's basketball. Again, these are all relative. And the rest of the sports, whatever. Obviously, at Alabama, football really runs the show and football really drives the bus. So structuring the athletic department, that is something that, you have to understand what your athletic department really needs. And for a former football coach, that may not really be the wave. The classic thing is that two of the former coaches turned ADs that me and Godfrey could think of off the top of our head were both baseball coaches and both are athletic directors in the SEC. We'll see how long they last in those jobs. But like, you think about sort of what these guys and girls have to do, these guys and women have to do. Martin Germain goes to UCLA, and really quickly after he gets there in short order, he unfucks this like disastrous Under Armour deal, and they're going to be wearing Jordan pretty soon. Like, that's a thing where you have to come in and you have to deal with a shoe company. Like, you have to untangle a shoe deal and get a new one in short order. Those are things that the ball coach ain't necessarily kind of.
Yeah, I'm just gonna straight up say this. Like, I don't think Ray Tanner can do that, homie. Just not in the man's wheelhouse. Go to College World Series, I got you, but like, he is not the guy I think I want dealing with Jumpman.
So Wisconsin has to figure out what to do next, and we spend a lot of time handicapping, like, what does a school need in an athletic director? What does that specific job entail? I guess I'd like to focus on the latter. Wisconsin, as I alluded to earlier, is worlds different than the bottom feeder with poor attendance that it was when Barry Alvarez got there. It's just a completely different animal, even than it was when he stepped into the athletic director's job in like the mid 2000s, because the Big Ten is just printing cash at this point. Is there anything about, it seems to me that this is a great athletic director's job, and like they should pretty much be a premier opening to get whoever they want. Is that an inaccurate assessment at this point?
No, I think Wisconsin is blessed with something that very few programs have, and that is that they know who they are and they're okay with it. Mm-hmm. I mean, I cannot name 10 of those. And because of that, the first thing I would do is keep Barry Alvarez around as emeritus in as many ways as he wants to be around. This is not a machine that is broken by any stretch. Wisconsin as a university is, by the way, also good at basketball. I am a non-basketball human being and watched exactly 1.5 tournament games this year. But I think I cursed Gonzaga, by the way. Wisconsin is like, it's safe to say they're a perennial tournament team. Is that okay to say?
Yes.
Okay. So with that in mind, your two major revenue sports are doing very well. Again, this is one of the few jobs where it's coming open for a specific reason in a very unique situation. Don't break the thing. Don't zig and zag. Don't Ron Prince this shit. Like, don't go in and do something different just because you are different than the person who was there for 40 odd years.
You, Godfrey, you mentioned something, and I actually think it's an interesting component about this. You are Wisconsin's new athletic director. How do you handle Barry Alvarez moving on into retirement and the twilight of his life? How do you handle that? Do you lionize? Are you worried about maybe skeletons in the closet that may be there? I'm not saying there are any there or intimating that there are any there. Do you name the field after him in 5 years? Is this are we still in a flowers when they still smell them era of college sports, or do we think that's changed at all?
Yeah, because
given sort of what we've seen with Scandal.
I mean, yeah, like to me it's a Snyder family stadium type of scenario, right? Where he is in such rare air and in such a unique situation and circumstance, and also I think you go and embrace him as much as he wants to be. I think the requirement really is about you and not about Wisconsin. I think you as the next athletic director have to be willing to work inside the shadow. That can be a very nice life, right? Paul Chryst can have a very nice life. We've established this. So I think it's really incumbent to embrace that and understand it, that you are not going to get out of the way. You're probably not going to rewrite the identity of Wisconsin athletics in any way, shape, or form, and that your job will be as mainly a custodian to possibly improve on the margins. I don't think as an athletic director you have the ability, nor do you have the audience in this instance, to walk into Madison and say, well, we haven't won a national title in football yet. Here's what we need to do. I really don't think that's going to work.
You have a great fan base. You have a fan base that knows what it is and what it could be in certain up years, but I think doesn't get too hard on you when the realities of being in the Big Ten catch up. And you just have like a really fun place to live and to be an administrator. I will quickly share before we move on that I think State Street in Madison might be the best main drag of any college that I've been to. You know, every school's got its little stretch of road, and State Street is quite a good time. High school Alex visiting a cousin who was there as like a junior or senior and getting to experience State Street. That was like a baptism for me, or maybe it was. You guys would have to tell me if it was the same thing, but it's a hell of a fun place. It's a beautiful campus. I just don't think it should be that hard of a sell to get just about anyone you want. Anyone else have anything on the Wisconsin? Unbelievable.
If there was
anybody
if
else
at any point in time there was liquid on your head and you felt a little transcendent, I guess you can call it a baptism. So that's as close to Wisconsin game day as you're going to get.
I will say that I'm in high school. I'm in Madison, Wisconsin, and it's like 11 o'clock on a Saturday, and my cousin's like, we're going to a pregame. And I was like, there's a game at midnight tonight? Like, is there a game later tonight? And there wasn't.
Sweet summer child.
There wasn't a game later that night. But I had a good time, and I was probably speaking about as clearly at the end of that night as I was just speaking, trying to mount this transition. Godfrey, you have a game for us that you have spent a lot of time preparing and that you have done some reporting to set up. Can you please share that with the listeners?
Would we say I've done a lot of work? Because I really feel like you're setting me up for failure here. I mean, like, we're going to say a lot. So, all right, gentlemen. By the way, before we get started, you guys, I said, hey, I came up with this little game, and these two nerds were completely uncomfortable with going into this blind, unlike yours truly, who spent most of his life pulling it out of his ass.
I was going to go in blind. I was rebuffed.
I like to do research because I like our listeners to know that we're putting serious knowledge into producing this show. Godfrey, what you have done is you have been...
That's their own fault for thinking that.
You have been drinking from the teapot.
Yeah. Let me take it. So this is gossip season for me. It's where I help Athlon put together their college football preview. I just talk to a lot of coaches about a lot of programs in a less specific way than like normally calling, a coach when news breaks and say, hey, do you know about this? This is just more like, hey, talk to me about every team in your conference. I do this over, and I do this over, and I do this over again. So I've got another game next week that I will not tell either one of you about that's somewhat in relation to this. It's a weird time because nobody's like looking forward the way they used to, right? The 1 year of uncertainty kind of waved over us, and nobody's really looking. I feel like we've lost perspective. This is happening in coaching. It's happening in media. So I'm going to kind of play with that idea over the next couple of weeks. Also, it's April, so I mean, what the fuck else are we going to do? We all know what a year zero is, right, gentlemen?
Yes. Okay. We do.
All right. So the idea of a year zero is essentially that you got to a job as a new head coach, and the situation was so poor that you really can't count it as year one. That this was just the year where you got you cleaned out the basement of the dead relative before you even got it up to like par to sell it. All right. So with that in mind, and we all know, and we've been over this a gajillion times, the things you could and couldn't do during COVID, right? Even in most states. Some states are more restrictive than others, but you couldn't really get to know your team. You couldn't recruit the way you want to. You couldn't get out in the community like all the things that a new coach wants to do, all right? So with that in mind, as I'm going through and I'm just hearing the gossip and doing the previews and stuff, I keep I keep hearing different coaches. Now, keep in mind, guys, these are rival coaches saying, well, you should really give them a mulligan. Like, don't even count this year. Don't even count this year, right? That's what I keep hearing over and over again. So I want to give you guys a list. And there's 2 sets on here. All right. The first ones are these sets of schools I don't think you guys are going to argue with. All right. These are the schools specifically, and I made a note of this as I was going along, where the rival coach or coaches in many instances would say, you know what, don't even count that year. Like, don't read anything into that team. Okay.
That being last year's performance, like that being based on how they did in 2020.
Exactly. So in other words, treat the situation that you're going into, and in the instance of these first schools, they're all new staffs. Okay. So keep that in mind as well. If I were to, I'm going to give you these lists of schools. I don't think you're going to disagree with me on these, but I want your thoughts. All right, guys, I'm going to start with a very easy candidate. This school had a month off inadvertently because of COVID, a brand new staff, a brand new philosophy, and basically total roster turnover. If I said to you, Baylor, go into 2021 giving them a year 0, you guys feel good about that?
Yeah, I can do that.
Well,
Alex wants to let him have it all the time.
I would say this.
No, Alex wants to let him have it whenever he can.
I think that you can give them a pass for generally being kind of blech last year. That much is fine. Dave Aranda does need to stop managing games like he is Mario Cristobal, because he doesn't have Mario Cristobal's talent advantage that Oregon has on the Pac-12. I think a lot about the Texas game last year, where Baylor lost by 11 and punted on separate occasions on 4th and 1 from the Baylor 44, 4th and 1 from the Baylor 34, and 4th and 12, this might be my favorite, from the Texas 30 for a touchback and a net of 10. Point being, he is not going to have a premier roster in the Big 12. Like, sorry, but that's just, unless that HGTV Bagman money is significant. We might need to talk about that after, in light of their national championship.
They're building some new like nerve center for the Magnolia Park thing in like an old newspaper thing. They're in Target now.
This is
so maybe that's
the sound you hear is
Godfrey,
me
look
realizing,
into that.
Yeah, the sound you hear is me realizing that the starter school that I used in this game is already under debate. So this is
all right.
We'll move it along. Fucking go places.
We'll move it along.
No, I'm not saying they shouldn't. I'm not saying they shouldn't get a mulligan year. I get it. I think when you talk about Baylor, remember Matt Rule was really great at getting blood from stones at the college level. Remember, there are still stones there. Like Dave Aranda comes in and he's still trying to barter with stones here. So maybe he wasn't as good getting blood from stones. It was a pandemic.
All right,
I don't think the defense changed irrevocably from Phil Snow. I haven't watched it enough to be honest with you, but I don't think it changed that much. It's still Big 12 type front. Yeah.
Okay.
So I get it.
I'm just saying his most recent experience was being the defensive coordinator for the grandest, most explosive offense that has ever played football. And I'm fine giving him a mulligan as long as he understands that he needs to be a little more aggressive about trying to score points at Baylor in the future, because you don't have Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and 6 other dudes. That's all.
Right, wow. It's okay. This is off the rails. Alex, of all people, just going hard on the Baylor situation. You know they won a national title last night.
Heard that.
Okay. Easy one. Layup. No one has a problem with this, right? Bad roster, bad program management, bad situation because of your rivals. Now, I know it's on the upswing already, but it wasn't when this guy got hired, and obviously COVID did not help. Does anyone have a problem completely wiping the slate for the University of South Florida?
I do not.
Okay. Every coach I spoke to in that conference was like, just look at them in 3 years. Like, completely just waving their hand off. Okay?
Yeah, they like went on the road to Notre Dame last year. I mean, it's tough.
Okay. I guess I would say that and I agree completely, wipe it, whatever. Godfrey, you used like the cleaning the basement to sell your dead relative's house analogy.
We've all been there.
You expect it to be gross, but like there were scorpions in there.
Yes.
You know? Like, correct. I would have liked it to have been, just for a little reassurance, slightly less gross. But yes.
Yeah, they were stunning.
It was real bad.
I will give it to him. I think you understand a little bit about the fundraising, how the fundraising sausage is made at USF. You can understand how potentially the pandemic can get in the way of that. I get it. Mulligan.
All right. Let's move on. Another one I think you will agree on, although Alex is he's like I don't want to be working for this athletic director because Kirsch is kind of a hard ass. All right, this team was in the Big Ten. It played games, which is more than, it got off a decent schedule in the Big Ten. Hired their coach extremely late. They went 2-5. Mel Tucker, Michigan State. We giving them a total mulligan?
I mean, they beat Michigan. Do they even need it? Like, they were passable, right?
They beat Michigan, but they got completely vaporized against Iowa, against Indiana, against Ohio State. They lost to Rutgers. I mean, they beat Michigan, and that's funny, but damn.
If you get hired in ostensibly February, yes, you get.
Okay, all right, cool. We feel good.
I would
you good? You firing anybody here?
I'm not firing anybody.
He's gonna find one.
But one general thing that I would like to see in 2021 is that if woes continue at their in-state rivals' household, and also if Penn State and not that they're necessarily recruiting against Maryland or Nebraska or any of those mid-tier Big Ten programs that have come in the last few years. But if there continues to be a lot of floundering, there might be an opening to be at least the second best team in the East, and it would be nice to see them kind of charge in that direction rather than the opposite way.
The second best team in the East?
If Michigan and Penn State are completely floundering, I'm not saying they should get there. I'm just saying they are currently existing in a moment where both Michigan and Penn State are at least a little shakier than they should be. And you would hate to waste all of that time being bad yourselves. I understand that Michigan State shouldn't be better than those teams. Nobody accused me of setting out unreasonable expectations. Just saying, try to win a game or two off of those teams this year. It would be useful.
We've talked a lot about what it takes to retrofit, overhaul, I don't know what you want to call it, a roster that's in the triple option. Imagine doing that with a Mike Leach air raid. Okay? Imagine doing that playing enough games to count on one hand. That is the situation for Nick Rolovich in Washington State, at Washington State, sorry. Are we giving him a pass? Because I heard nothing but give him a pass.
Yeah, I'll give him a pass for a couple reasons. Washington State is just so broke as an athletic department. And it ain't getting any better, particularly because as the Pac-12 money thing continues to not work out. It's one of the reasons why their athletic director almost took the Kansas job.
You know where their last athletic director went? To another athletic department that seems to be running swimmingly.
Nebraska. So there's that. The other thing is I think people see ball throw far in the run and shoot, and people see ball throw far in the air raid and think they're the same thing. They are not the same thing.
That's a very good point, Richard.
The run and shoot is called the run and shoot because they run, and also the run and shoot is just less personnel packages. We're not showing you a ton with the run and shoot, whereas God love him, the air raid will at least have some tight endy looking bodies and stuff like that, and the air raid will also go a little bit more horizontal, mesh, that sort of stuff versus run and shoot.
Alex, you good?
I think I'm fine with this.
Right.
Yeah, the one thing I will say is that Nick Rolovich gave me bad vibes last year.
Okay.
Remember when he was caught on tape, red-handed.
He definitely fucked up.
Hey, sorry, I would hope nothing happens to your scholarship to your spot on the team if this kid engages in Pac-12 player activism. Not good when there are tapes, Nick. Not good when there are tapes. Gives me bad vibes, but I like his quarterback, and we'll see where they go.
This next team didn't play a home game, but also I had to check their schedule in multiple places because I thought it was an error, and that's a really mean thing to say to fbschedules.com. I love you guys, but I just thought, like the little bot that counts your scores was wrong. It was not. So New Mexico, of all the teams that could claim a distraction from COVID, I think might have the winner here. They had canceled games, and they couldn't even play at home. They essentially defied any basic piece of reasoning that says this is amateur athletics or college sports because they were in Las Vegas operating as a permanent sort of neutral site team just to have a season for reasons I still don't understand. But do you know what they did in the last 2 weeks of the season? Winless New Mexico. Winless New Mexico lost to San Jose State, lost to Hawaii, lost to Nevada, lost to Air Force, lost to Utah. A shitty Utah State team, okay? They beat in back-to-back weeks Wyoming and Fresno State.
How fucking Rocky Long is that?
If I put down $500 and bet members of the college football media whether or not that happened without them looking, I don't think they'd believe me.
I didn't know it happened, and I pride myself on knowing things like that. Also, Rocky Long being the defensive coordinator there right now is a real brain buster. You mean to tell me there's no Palace coup going on there? You mean to tell me that's entirely on the up and up? Okay.
Right.
I will say we talked about coaches who go into a different seat and drive the bus from the back seat. And there may be a little bit of that going on.
It's some Game of Thrones shit.
I think Danny Gonzalez is a bright defensive mind, but Rocky Long there helps.
Well, he's starting out. It may not even be that nefarious. I just think he's starting out. I know a lot of young coaches. Like when Fuente was at Memphis, he had like 4 or 5 former head coaches on his staff, and credited that with his success starting out at Memphis.
Yeah, Lincoln Riley hired Ruffin McNeil in year 1.
That's his guy, dude.
It was a good hire.
All right, moving on. This team had one remarkable win that people forgot about, otherwise had a pretty brutal last year. I'm talking about everybody's favorite Conference USA team, the Rice Owls, trying to do the Stanford of Texas. In case you forgot, randomly, on December 5th, they went out and took a lead pipe to Marshall's face over and over again in a 20-0 shutout, which is one of the strangest finishes in college football last year. Marshall finished 7-3.
Sure did.
That was one of me and Alex's worst beats of the year.
It was an unbelievable game.
No, I think I had the under. I think I was fine.
Oh, I was on the wrong side of that. You want to talk about getting pounded at the window? That was a game.
That was something.
So I just want just to paint you a picture of what 2020 looked like, and we were trying to figure out why are we even playing this sport, or like why is this happening right now. So Rice starts their season on October 24th. They lose in double overtime to Middle Tennessee. They do very well against an interim USM team. They have a game against UTSA canceled. They have a game against Louisiana Tech canceled. They lose by 10 to North Texas. They have a game against UTEP canceled. They, out of nowhere, out of everything I just said, take the pipe to Marshall, and then they lose to UAB to close the season. That's not a football season. That's just a confluence of strange events. Are we giving them a pass?
Yes, they were better last year than they have typically been.
This is the nicest you've been so far. So
the Marshall thing was
Marshall bias is showing.
The Marshall thing might have been the most shocking result of the year. I think the only one more shocking was when ECU scored like a jillion on SMU in the first 20 minutes. So yeah, sure. Good. I think that Mike Bloomgren is decent, and like it's not an easy place to win, and he's made a little bit more headway in that direction than some of his predecessors. So sure, yeah, 2020 was fine.
This school specifically, not a first-year school. Neither is Mike Bloomgren, by the way. We're just going to move across Houston and go to the University of Houston. Here's the argument that was made by a rival coach. They knew essentially, one, if you remember the sort of roster chicanery that was going on with the Eric King and holding the guys back for the redshirt year when Dana got there.
And that goes back to 2019.
That's 2019, right.
Stuff.
So that stuff happens in 2019 where Dana gets there and basically says, like, Major Applewhite didn't recruit enough. Like, this is going to be a problem. We're going to take our losses up front. We're going to retrench. Then De'Aaron King transfers to Miami. The whole thing kind of has to pivot. Then they don't have any spring practice whatsoever. And they have, I mean, everyone had a strange year, but this was a particularly strange year where they were supposed to play at Baylor. They were supposed to play at North Texas. And they start rescheduling games. They don't start their season until October 8th. They beat Tulane, which is like probably the best thing they did this year. They beat USF. They had more games canceled, 2 more, Tulsa and SMU, so I don't even know what that total brings up to. But basically, nothing really happens for the Cougars in a way that, like, on paper, given it's 2020, they shouldn't belong on this list. They finished 3-5, by the way. But remember, the Tillman Fertitta Houston expectations, is this a sign of anything other than 2020 for Houston?
Ooh.
It might be. I sort of think they better get something figured out.
Well, here's the good news for Dana, but Godfrey, you can correct me about this because, again, this is someone who you've reported it on, and I think you know. they're not going to pay that buyout. Tillman, the mega donor Tillman Fertitta, that man's got
literally
leverage.
said that. This is why I bring all this up. Alex, you make a very good point. Dana just started talking like, what are they going to do? Pay my buyout? Probably not a good situation when you're openly acknowledging this.
No, but it's like Tillman has leverage issues and not in the way that like a cornerback is like a line too far outside a receiver. Like that man reportedly has some obligations that are going to be challenging to pay back. I don't know.
From the football sense of speaking as well, they've got a really sharp young defensive mind in Doug Belk, who's their defensive coordinator. He came from Alabama, Saban tree guy. Georgia tried to hire him, that sort of stuff. Let's say Pete Golding leaves Alabama at the end of next season for whatever reason. Perhaps Doug Belk may go back to Alabama. That's what I'm starting to think of. The band may not stay together, and right now the band's tune itself is a little bit off, particularly with the instruments that are supposed to be hitting on offense.
All right. What about, this is, again, I tried to find the weirdest schedules after I was told by coaches, no, hey, that was just an impossible situation. And in most cases, you can instantly look at these schedules and realize, like, oh, yeah, there's no way to like create consistency here. There's no way to build the kind of like momentum and almost sort of like thoughtless practice that goes into not actual practice, just like the things you do during seasons. So Florida Atlantic, one of the worst offenses in the country, very strange, Willie Taggart offensive guy. They don't play at all. They have a game against USF canceled. They play Charlotte and win barely. Then they have like another month off. They lose to Marshall. They win a spate of games in like a really, like, honestly, it was Jim Leavitt just coaching the shit out of that defense. They beat UTSA 24-3. They beat Western Kentucky 10-6. God, what that sounds miserable. They close out the year with a bunch of losses to Georgia Southern, to Southern Miss, to Memphis. They're not good. They're flat out not good. This was supposed to be the instant beginning of sort of Willie Taggart's rebuttal back to Florida State that, hey, I'm not the problem, you're the problem. What do we think about Willie Taggart? What do we I mean, like, FAU is supposed to be, even on an off year, a more talented team than a less talented team when you measure the Conference USA. They offensively did not look like a team that sits in South Florida.
No, they didn't. I think that their offense is maybe somewhat, the low output is somewhat a factor of the fact that Willie's game management style is sort of like, honestly, his successor at Oregon. It's kind of like Cristobal. Like, he's not a guy who tries to run a ton of tempo and fill up the scoreboard quickly, but they look terrible. I still think the defense is good enough that they should win 6 games or 7. Like, I think that it's a 500-ish team, and if you look at that schedule, the only 2 games that like they should definitely or pretty definitely lose are UAB and the Gators. Chop chop, Richard. Mm-hmm. But you also just like don't see a lot of you don't see as many slam dunk wins as you'd like, given the talent advantages that they should have against most of their opponents. And they'll probably beat UTEP. They're in better straits than FIU is right now, but given how much more talented they should be than the rest of their league, it feels like they're a little bit behind.
Okay, I left the most controversial for last. It's very simple. However, I got a little assist on, we have 2 major Power 5 programs left. I got a little assist on one, so I want to save that for the end. So I'm actually going to go with LSU now. I don't think we need to recap LSU season. I think even if you're a casual college football fan, you have a pretty good idea of what happened or what didn't happen for the Tigers. Without recapping all of it, I will just say anecdotally, and I'm not supposed to spoil all the Athlon stuff, the incredulity, Richard, that people still hold for Bo Pelini's inability to shut down Mississippi State in Week 1 with KJ Costello. I heard so many bad words. Just like, it is apparently, because now people are watching cut-ups in the offseason, it's that much worse, apparently. It's like when one of those like cult horror films like The Ring, where they're like, when you watch it the 3rd time, it's scarier. Apparently that's the territory we're in, where it's like they made no adjustments. Apparently they made no adjustments. Like, he stayed in the whole time, I guess, or something.
I will do the oral history of that game in about a decade once all those players have matriculated through the NFL. That game will live rent-free in my head for years to come. particularly given what then happened with the balance of both of those teams 2 seasons.
Right?
The thing with first of all, I think LSU, as long as they can figure out the quarterback thing, and I think Max Johnson might be it, or at least close to it, I think they're going to be a lot better than people are sort of pegging them to be.
Why? Because if you're right, then I think we should give them a pass, right?
I will give them a pass. It just it can't be that bad next year again. The other thing is, and I am not sitting here saying that they're going to beat Alabama next year, but I am going to say that someone's got to win the West in a year that I think Alabama has a Citrus Bowl in them.
Okay.
So
A&M?
Someone's got to win the West.
A&M?
Might as well be either A&M or LSU, because it ain't going to be all.
Imagine we're way off topic, but imagine if this was Kellen Mond's last year coming up, the hype on A&M would just be through the fucking roof.
I am skeptical of LSU deserving a mulligan because I think that they had two problems. One problem has a name. It was Bo Pelini. The second problem is that, again, bad vibes, managerially speaking, like a lot of malfeasance that is much more serious than hiring shitty coaches going back to before Ed Orgeron was even the head coach that has come to light this offseason. Other stuff that just doesn't smell great that continues to be reported out kind of in trickles by USA Today and others that have shown a program that really seems like it has had a lot of not good going on not too far beneath the surface. And like Ed Orgeron admitted this in a press conference a couple weeks ago. He hired coaches on his 2020 staff who he didn't interview.
Yeah,
Which,
and I wrote about that, and I think I think that's a specific reference to Bo, based on what I know.
The point is, it has been enough of a managerial cluster the last couple months and longer, but just knowing about it the last couple months, that I'm at least entertaining the possibility in my mind that what happened in 2019 was a world historic aberration, the result of falling ass backwards into the perfect offensive assistant, the perfect quarterback, and the perfect receiver group at the right time when Alabama wasn't quite itself, and producing one of the best teams of all time in a fashion that was not even slightly repeatable. It could be, because this is a tough business.
Okay. I'll leave it at this. It sounds like Richard kind of wants to give them a pass purely on schematics.
I do.
The oogie that's all over this program is just radioactive, so no one really wants to give them the benefit of any doubt. I understand that. But in purely football terms, we'll go ahead and do it. I just want to leave one little thing out here on April, whatever the hell it is today. Gentlemen, they opened the season at UCLA. If ever there was a moment in which one I don't want to call it dynasty. One moment ends and one moment begins. That's about as diplomatic as I could say that, all right? Because I keep hearing things on the West Coast about how, like, they're going to quietly come along. They're going to quietly come along, talking about the Bruins. Like, imagine the shit show if UCLA wins that game. Just want to throw that out.
God, if they go out there, if they're going out there, right?
Yes. It's eerily.
They're going out there.
It's eerily reminiscent, just off the top of my head.
When they went to Lambeau Field.
No, I was going to say, well, that. But also, I was going to say when Tennessee went out to UCLA and opened the season years ago, and basically the same thing happened. So, the last one. Alex, contain your Maryland glee. 2020 Penn State football opened with probably the game of the year, one of the games of the year, the loss to Indiana, loss to Ohio State, a loss to your Maryland Terrapins, a loss at Nebraska, and a loss at home to Iowa. They, of course, righted the ship, as people do, by beating Michigan. Then they beat Rutgers, Michigan State, and Illinois, 3 shitty teams. It was a bad year at Penn State, y'all. One that I've had this question. We've had this question. It's come up on Twitter, y'all, where, hey, why aren't more people talking about this in terms of, like, the James Franklin era? Or why did we not see even more staff changes? They obviously made a change at OC. I mean, he wasn't going to fire Brent Pry. The dude's been with him forever. But I didn't know, to be honest, because I have fleeting memories of watching them, and nothing seems consistent about 2020 football. So I asked our friend Ben Jones, who covers Penn State, who went to Penn State, at Ben_Jones88. So I think I said something really, really, like, informed and erudite, like, hey, why was Penn State ass? And I said, do you have, like, one article I can read and I can act like I know? He said, I think, I'm just going to read this off. I don't think I have it all summed up nicely in one place, but I'll expand on a few general thoughts in one place here. 1. Sean Clifford was not very good. He made bad throws and fumbled it away more than he should have. I was going to ask Richard if you just, at the end of each one of these points, I'm just going to go with you, Richard. Trace McSorley was pretty good at not doing dumb shit. Clifford was not as sharp this year. You're as good as your quarterback's brain. Okay, you feel good about that one?
Yeah,
okay.
I do feel good about
Number 2, Journey Brown and Noah Kane getting hurt before the season and in the first quarter of Game 1 turned this offense from death by running back into something that it wasn't prepared to be. The other backs were really pretty good, but they weren't supposed to be that piece of pie. Penn State's receivers were supposed to be the weak spot. Turns out that they were the strength. Franklin would mention from time to time how hard it was to change identity from running to passing in the middle of the season. Richard?
Check to a point, because at the end of the day, they had one of the best tight ends in college football, and they just weirdly didn't use him, wouldn't use him, stop it. Pat Fryermuth's usage last year is very confounding to me. So half check.
3, losing in week 1. Oh, that Indiana game. They played pretty well, all things considered, but losing in overtime and knowing that they were going to lose to Ohio State in week 2 is a lot of wind out of the sails. Secondary wasn't great in week 3, and Tua Jr. played great. Shout out to Alex.
Yeah, because I didn't think, you play Maryland, and I don't think you know what you're going to get from Maryland. But then again, when you watch that game and you watch Maryland score,
we beat their ass. We beat their ass.
There it is. That's what I was waiting for.
You don't see that out of Maryland against anybody except FCS teams. And it was embarrassing for Penn State. And Raheem Jarrett, a 5-star freshman receiver, scored on the same slant at least twice.
Yeah,
the same thing. And Penn State's safeties and DBs were supposed to be good. So that was perplexing. Here's my main thing that I think this hinges on. Broadly speaking, it's the passing offense. I think there's actually reason to think Sean Clifford will be okay. He was hold. He was his worst games, including the Maryland game, also Ohio State and Nebraska when he got hurt/pulled quickly, were games where he was running for his life. I checked the PFF data on this. He was pressured a ton in those games. I think 34 times just between the Maryland and Ohio State games, and then 4 times on 10 dropbacks against Nebraska. He actually was one of the better passers in the Big Ten when pressured. He was throwing for 7 yards an attempt when pressured. He did some decent things in a difficult situation, but he wasn't sharp all around. Their receivers, other than you mentioned, Richard, that they just kind of ignored their great tight end, but Jahan Dotson is a dude and pretty much was uncoverable in man. The rest of them, not as much so as you would have hoped, given that they recruited a lot of pretty high-end receivers. And I'm just not sure, even with Mike Yurcich, the new offensive coordinator, who I think, Godfrey, is pretty well regarded. Am I correct about that?
Came from Okie State. I was at his first game as OC, by happenstance. I was doing a different kind of story, but creative, I think, is the word. So that brings there's a good segue here, Alex. Not to cut you off. Ben says, number 4, I don't think Kirk, and he's talking about, is it Soroka, right? And James got along super well. They just come across as very different people, and Kirk, in the one time that we talked to him during the season, was very careful with his words. Contrast that with James and Brent Pry being about the only guy who doesn't give a fuck if James is going to yell at him later. I can confirm that part, that is very much that dynamic. And then 5, there's 8 points, but 5 relates to this, Alex. Penn State did not have a single spring practice, somewhat self-explanatory issues when it comes to installing a new offense with a new OC. I will say this.
Sure.
Minnesota beat Penn State in a rather convincing way with really good wide receiver play in 2019, probably convinced Franklin to hire Soroka, and then this happened. So no one has beat James Franklin more than Kirk Soroka the last 2 years.
Damn, that is tough.
Salty.
I will say that if there's enough pieces in the passing offense that I think they could be good, but also none of them are sure things, except for Jahan Dotson's going to be good. And so I just don't know. It feels very much kind of on the razor's edge. Richard, are people at Penn State at some point going to get sick of James Franklin at least being in the offing for jobs that aren't Penn State every 5 minutes?
This is actually the curious thing to me. If they go 8-4 this year, do we start to venture into conscious uncoupling territory?
Okay.
That is what I am interested in seeing, where Penn State's not going to fire him because that's probably dumb, but maybe it's better for both parties if mom and dad don't speak anymore.
So
I don't know if that point is next year or if you play out the string and run it back in 2022 and then we really see.
Ben's conclusion, and he had some more stuff, and he sent me way too much information because he's a good reporter. He said, overall, I think they fucked themselves at times in general, but between injuries, a new OC, no spring brawl, and a bad start, and COVID, things just snowballed. And that's a tight enough summary to make me think, like, okay, there's not a systemic issue here. But Richard has a good point because this isn't the complete picture, and we would be foolish not to mention the fact that, like, Tennessee wanted to hire this dude, and there was at least some semblance of a conversation, whether the Tennessee wants to admit that or not. So there was conversation to the point where, like, James Franklin's name was associated with that job for about, was it 4 days? It's amazing how fast these things move.
I mean, if USC opens, what's going to happen? Like, you know what I mean? Like, a big other job is going to open, and then what's going to happen?
If USC opens, I think we may resolve this entire conversation. And then what Penn State does after this is going to be very interesting to me. I guess they get I guess he gets a pass. I guess he does. But, like, 7 wins is going to piss a lot of people off this year.
It feels like they're not too far away from, like, a Justin Fuente dynamic. And he hasn't done anything as egregious as what Fuente tried to do in bolting. But it feels like if they just continue to be, like, a little less than they should, and that continues in the, like, other jobs realm, like, that
he just
might
has
not
such
be the best.
He just has
for that
such a good
relationship.
contract. Like, that contract was basically
It's a great contract.
Tennessee couldn't match it. I mean, you're going to have to pay him $7 million a year somewhere. So, like, you're either stuck with him at Penn State or USC gets real dumb and expensive in the offseason and going into 22.
No doubt. I want to pause for a quick podcast business break before we take some questions. Home Field Apparel is your home for premium, vintage, and comfortable collegiate apparel. Gentlemen, big new Saturday, Season 2, is reportedly coming in early June. Richard, you excited about that?
Yeah, it's Big New Saturday, so I'm excited for it. Like, what is there for me to be excited about on June Saturdays, if not for logging on to see
I
what
needed
my
that.
favorite premium, vintage, comfortable collegiate apparel brand is dropping at 12 noon every Saturday.
Yeah, I really needed my subscription box. I'm going to have to get a new dresser drawer to fit the Season 2 offering into it, but that's the kind of sacrifice I make for a beloved podcast partner. Homefield has a really good collection of schools on the way, also already up on its website at homefieldapparel.com. If you go there and you use promo code SZD, you will get 20% off your first order, and we would love it if you did. It's a great way to support this podcast. Also, like Richard's wearing a Homefield shirt right now. It actually just says Homefield on it, podcasting.
I'm actually double Homefield right now. I'm Homefield on the top and Homefield on the bottom. The Sad Dog joggers came in, and, you know, if you've ever met me, I'm a little bit on the thicker side. But they did stretch out a little bit. So shout out to the apparel,
the good brand,
Homefield Apparel.
Yep, promo code SAD at homefieldapparel.com, 20% off your first order. Thanks, Homefield, for your support. Okay, question time. Gents, last week, Richard and I launched a crowdfunding platform for this podcast that is specifically for this podcast. It includes multiple bonus episodes every month. We had realized that there are a lot of people who listen to this show who don't really want to spend a lot of time in Discord, and we're looking for ways to support what we do and get more out of it. And we now have that, which is cool. Thank you so much to the more than 400 people who have already signed up for that Patreon. There are already multiple episodes there that you can check out. We're putting another one up later this week as we record. But one of the perks is that being a patron of the show is a great way, really the way, to get questions answered on this show and on the monthly Q&A episodes that we do behind the Patreon wall. Thank you, Stephen Godfrey, for appearing as a guest on that show last week. I want to take a few questions from patrons now for all to hear, if you guys would be interested in that.
Hey, Alex, real fast. Real fast.
Yeah.
How would one become a patron?
Oh, well, someone's got to sharpen up their promotional skills at splitzoneduo.com, which redirects you to our Patreon page, or patreon.com/SZD, dealer's choice. But splitzoneduo.com would take you to the outlet where you can sign up, and we really appreciate it. We've had a lot of fun making the episode so far, and people seem to have enjoyed it. We have tried to get to talk with as many people as possible, whether that's on Discord or in the Patreon DMs, and we've gotten a lot of questions Someone, patron Taylor R, is a USC fan, and it's actually a perfect segue from what we were just talking about with James Franklin because you touched on USC. Richard had said something on a show that he and I did without any guests a few weeks ago that alluded to, Richard, you being a little more optimistic about USC going forward, but you wanted to wait until we had some guest, I guess it was Godfrey, back on the show to talk about it. Richard, why are you feeling a little more chipper about the men of Troy right now? Or have you already gone back on this?
No, I think it's sort of betting a little bit bigger on what Clay Helton did with that staff, turning over that staff, particularly some of the recruiting infrastructure that was obviously so sorely lacking with the bad, what was it? I guess the 2019 signing day class was the bad one, or was it 2020? Can't remember. But either way, to reverse some of the things that just should not happen because you're USC, I think that defense is going to be it this year, legitimately. And that's something that I'm just sort of excited to see. Keaton Slovis is going to be a draft darling if they're any good next year, particularly on offense. So look out for that. It's just one of those things where, for God's sakes, they weren't bad last year is the other thing. No. They really weren't bad.
No, we grade them on a difficult curve.
It's not exactly. It's not about being bad. It's about being USC.
And Godfrey, do you anticipate, I mean, every time we talk about USC, Godfrey, you talk about Heritage Hall and all of the USC bullshit and USC getting in its own way. Do you think that they can get out of it enough to be what they should be, or at least a top tier Pac-12 team next year?
No, I mean, it's kind of, it has a Groundhog Day vibe, so I'm kind of predicting like another 12 months of the same thing of just, you know, I here's the thing, based on what Richard said, like I've heard the same thing. People are excited about Todd Orlando, like the defense should fit really well, like personnel-wise, with what he wants to do. These are things I hear, not things I see on film. I'm not that guy. But I also think the fact, like, Graham Harrell's still there. You know, they thought maybe they were going to lose Graham Harrell to a G5 job or a P5 job even, and they didn't. So this is a staff intact. It is they are talented. They had talent last year. They've done a better job recruiting. We should probably, if they did not have that uniform and that helmet, I would just say, hey, this is a really good Pac-12 team, and that's what they're going to be this year, is a really good Pac-12 team. They're just not going to change or challenge anything on the top end of college football.
To show how fragile these narratives and these discussions are, remember that they were 5-0 before they got put in the Pac-12 championship game. They made the Pac-12 championship game.
Got put is a very apt way to put that.
But which side of the Pac-12 championship game was the one that got swapped in? Was it USC or was it Oregon?
No, that was the North.
At any rate,
that was the North.
I think that was the North. the North. But the point is that USC was perfect up until that point, but like, they should have lost to both Arizona schools. And if they had, would Clay Helton still be there? Not sure. Great sport where we make decisions based on like getting off by the hair on your chinny chin chin against Arizona. But that's exactly what Clay Helton pulled off last year. Okay, Matt asks and says that the semi-secret is out that BYU provided a lot of protection for Zach Wilson with a solid offensive line scheme and just nastiness last year. Does anyone have thoughts on how that will translate, I believe, via offensive coordinator Jeff Grimes to Baylor and the Big 12?
Yeah, I remember a couple things about why Zach Wilson and BYU was so brilliant this year. Remember, passing scheme, concepts, Zach Wilson's development, that is down to Andy Roderick, who was the passing game coordinator, was then bumped up to offensive coordinator because Jeff Grimes is no longer there. Jeff Grimes is not the architect of the BYU passing game last year, but he was the architect of the protection scheme that gave Zach Wilson enough time to file his 1040 EZ in the pocket if he so wished to do. Can you bring that? Can you port that to Baylor? Maybe. Oklahoma has a really, really consistently good offensive line, so it's not like you can't do that in the Big 12. But are you going to port Brady Christensen over there? That's one of the things you have to do. You have to get good players. Now, if they're going to come out at Baylor and do a lot of that play action stuff, it's going to be very interesting what the passing game is that they bolt on top of it. That is what I'm curious to see about as far as how Baylor goes this year. A lot of Baylor talk this week.
I mean, it's just a personnel issue right now. Also, like, all I know about Grimes is they're going to do wide zone, right, Richard?
Yes, they will.
Yep. I think they're going to try and run that damn ball as much as they can in the Big 12 while Aranda gets that defense back.
If they're going to be the defensive changeup or the defensive complement, because somebody has to, and TCU doesn't look like they're able to, if it's going to be Baylor, all right.
I'm interested in Baylor's quarterback situation because they've had like several decent ones on their roster the last few years. I guess Gary Bohannon is going to be the guy this year, who I loved as a recruit. He was a 4-star from Arkansas who wound up going to Texas. I think this might be his moment, though obviously predicting starting quarterbacks in changeover situations is kind of a fool's errand. I'm curious. I'm curious, and I think he might be really good, so we'll see. One more. Sean F. says that since 5 schools left the Sun Belt to go to Conference USA in 2012-13, those were Western Kentucky, Middle Tennessee, North Texas, FIU, and FAU, it seems that the Sun Belt is looking better and better, and Conference USA is looking worse. Would the Sun Belt have been better off if these schools had stayed? Would any of these schools go back to the Sun Belt if given the chance? This is a fun one. I think that for the Sun Belt's purposes, would they have been better off if these schools had stayed? I think no. I think they wouldn't. I think that, and Godfrey, you had talked about this on the bonus episode on Patreon that you were kind enough to appear on last week. This exodus, I think it's fair to say, is what spurred the Sun Belt to go out and get like App State, to get Georgia Southern. And they went out and got schools that like had kind of a built-in serious blood rivalry and that played good football and hated each other while doing it. And, you mix that in with the Louisiana schools in that conference, and you kind of have a league that is appropriately hateful, appropriately disdainful of one another within the conference, and that also features some pretty good football. So I think the Sun Belt is probably pretty happy, at least competitively, with how that worked out, no?
I think there's some regrets on the CUSA side, definitely. So the original question was, is would they go back?
Well, there's 2 questions. It's would the Sun Belt have been better off if they stayed? And I think the answer is no. And also, would any
no,
this is maybe where it gets really interesting is would any of these schools, that being again Western Kentucky, Middle, North Texas, FIU, FAU, would they go back if given the chance?
I think some would, but the money is not. There isn't a difference enough in the money, I think, for it to matter. But I just think that the Sun Belt's better positioned. We've talked a lot about this. I think the better answer, honestly, if the Sun Belt sees fit, is that you do essentially absorb and create mega conferences that are more pod oriented, where you have a rotation of maybe a 7-game schedule or something like that within your pod, or 6. And then you have 2 from a different region. I mean, it really is as simple. What I'm saying sounds crazy, but it's just take the 2 conferences, put them together on a map, and then just kind of create like quadrants or something like that. We teased this a lot on that patron episode that I was invited on about how the bottom of the group of 5, top of the FCS might reverse engineer realignment this time. We've called time of death on the Conference USA, I think, for like the past 2 years. So if you're Middle Tennessee State or Western Kentucky, I do think that there are a lot of serious conversations in boardrooms right now as to like, well, why did we do this? Like, what did we gain from it? Because I'm going to tell you right now what the Sun Belt got from it, with those 2 schools specifically, is that they lost 2 schools that should have had football fan bases who didn't for whatever reason, and they immediately got 2 in Georgia Southern and App who have decades of history and national championships at the FCS level, and fans who travel and people who get excited, and it honestly is a better brand of football.
The Sun Belt's long-term differentiating feature is that the teams are just a better fit with one another. And I think that, like, Godfrey, you're advocating the Super Conference. I honestly think the Sun Belt might be fine. Like, I think that if Coastal sticks around for a while, and I think the Sun Belt has good schools in its inventory right now,
I think there's one or two they might
just survive.
There's 1 or 2 they might take, and I mean, like, the Texas State situation doesn't look great right now. There are some unhealthy aspects of the Sun Belt, but I mean, by and large, it's hard to find fat on that cut, because like, USA was a bad team that's getting tremendously better and investing in facilities and doing all the right things. Like, I don't know, maybe Troy falls off a cliff again. Maybe.
I just want to put this out there to anyone listening. If you are in possession of good financial information about the TV contracts for the Sun Belt and Conference USA, which is stunningly hard to come by, I believe we're in the $400 to $500 grand range a year per school in those leagues. if you're in possession of that information and can give me good gossip about it, because for some reason I care and really want to know about these 6-figure differences or even 5-figure differences between these two deals per school, reach out. We'd love to get some Godfrey's DMs about that. Gentlemen, we've also got some people to thank very quickly before we get out of here today. A number of people have decided to support our podcast to the tune of a very significant monthly donation to just help us do what we do and make this a little bit more sustainable, which we think it is going to be sustainable for the long term. Thank you to Chris B., who simply passes along Roll Damn Humps. That's a nod to one of 2020's defining teams, the Campbells.
Cover of the season by the Campbells against one Georgia Southern Eagles.
Remember that when Georgia Southern, right? That was such, obviously, it was such a weird situation because, and really objectively horrible, because the reason that a lot of Georgia Southern players were not playing was deadly virus related.
Literally like half.
But
maybe we should have played the fucking football game.
Maybe we shouldn't have the football game. But roll humps. We love Campbell on this show. Ben C., who simply states, "Go Hawks." It's a Hawkeye State Cyclones. Historically, that has been true. Wow, I'm looking forward. We didn't have Alaska last year because the Big Ten's protocols determined that it was safe for, Iowa to travel to, I don't know, Rutgers or wherever it is they had to play last year, but not to do the bus thing for whatever that trip is, an hour or two between Ames and Iowa City. And Josh Black.
Oh, I'll take it from here, my good friend.
Richard, close us out.
Josh Black, an Auburn lifer, he would like to eschew the standard War Eagle and simply list the number of days since Georgia's last national title. There's a website that tracks this, and apparently it has been 14,705 days. Now, depending on when you listen to this, it could be 14,706 days. It could be 14,707 days. Hell, it could be 14,800 days. I don't know when you're listening.
Why put a limit on it,
gentlemen?
Why put a limit on it?
Just to pile on. Just for Josh's sake. How old did I turn last week?
40. You're a man.
Yeah.
You're 40.
There have been no Georgia national titles in my lifetime.
It's crazy how that works. But at the end of the day, Josh's point is pretty succinct in his last sentence of his shout out. That's a lot of days.
Oh, I added that, but that's just some color commentary.
Oh, that's good. That's good. That's good editorial process there. Alex Kirshner, where can the people find you?
People can find me all over the place. I am on Twitter at Alex_Kirshner. Also, Jason Kirk, our business partner and friend, and I are doing a locker room show once a week, Tuesday nights at 7 Eastern. Would love to see you there. It's like live audio, but interactive.
Do you need an app for that?
You do need an app. It's called Locker Room. And we are there with our friends, Andrew Stevens and team from Sports Drink, and it should be a lot of fun. We'd love to see you there.
Godfrey, where can the people find
At
you?
38 Godfrey on Twitter and Instagram, bannersociety.com.
I'm at RJ_Wrights. The Patreon is patreon.com/SZD. SplitZoneDuo.com. Either one, whichever one tickles your fancy. Go on. We'll be back next week.